3, 2, 1, and welcome back to Chasing the Racing, episode 49.
And this episode's called Put Some Hair Around It, You'll Get It In, Chrissy. There you are, that took a while, didn't it, to get the microphone going?
We're kind of a bit lost off with the seasons now, but we did start doing seasons every 12 episodes, so this is actually the beginning of our season 5.
Shut up, man.
Well, obviously 4 times 12 is 48, so that's the end of the 40. So we're just starting series. Is it season or series 5? Season 5, we'll call it. So,
and from now on in this season, we're going to do every episode at 6 hours long. This is what this episode's going to be. So there we go.
So you had a busy week this week?
Not as busy as tonight. Tonight's been a hot dinger of a night, Chrissy. Hot dinger of a night.
You've been a man in demand tonight, haven't you, with your interviews? I seen on the old FaceTube there that you've did an interview with Holly Smith over on, is it Irish?
But she started up her own business called Holly Smith Media. She's covering the road race, and she's actually becoming training to be a professional horse jockey. I didn't want to just say a jockey because that would be quite rude, and you know what lads are like with their imagination. It's just borderline obscene even. But anyway, yeah, so it was obviously very nice of Holly to ask me to be on like her interviewing panel. She's asking all the road races at the moment and just back and forth questions. And
did you get sorted out with the setup? Did you do it over Skype video?
I over Skype, so it was a case of, well, basically Paul Jordan bottled it. God love Paul, you gotta love him. So Holly asked Paul, can you do you want to do a live interview? And obviously Paul was a bit busy, so he couldn't be able to do it. So Holly went, well, who's up for a bit of a challenge? And obviously rang Naka here. And yeah, it was good crack. So we've been doing that today. And then we've obviously been on with another interview tonight, haven't we, Chrissy?
I have. I tell you, just as you mentioned Paul there, he actually gave me a good idea. A few weeks ago, you mentioned about selling a rower, and Paul was looking for a Concept 2 rower.
He put on FaceTube. He was looking for
with my shoulder, I can't actually use my rower at the moment. So I bought this maybe about 3 years ago. They were about 850 quid brand new. I paid 650 for a really good one, hardly being used. And so I had a little look on eBay what they're going for. Bear in mind, 850 new, mine's 5-year-old, right? And they're selling for over 1,000 quid. So
is that because everyone's trying to home
gyms? Yeah. So I don't think they can get the new ones into the country. So the obviously with the old supply and demand, the prices have shot up. So I've got mine on now. It's the bidding's going swimmingly.
Is this a hint for you to try and get the bids up? Is it?
That's it. But I spot on. Straight on with the interview, or have you got anything else to cover?
No, bar the fact that I'm never buying anything from you, Chris. You'll rip us off, you little cheeky git. But no, it's. Have you actually announced who we've got on?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, obviously, James, fantastic guest, and I tell you what, once you get the ball rolling with this man, he just keeps on going. But it is very entertaining, very entertaining.
For the first time I've ever met James, obviously he's been commentating on BSB races for years, but I did an end of season party once at Brands Hatch. I once went into the reception bit, and it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was sat by himself. And he just went on. There was a big grand piano in the reception, and he sat down, and he was absolutely he was mortal, so drunk. And he sat down and he started playing, and he was amazing,
Are you winding me up?
No. And the hotel manager kept coming over, but he was so drunk, he was just laughing. And honestly, I couldn't believe how good he was on this piano, especially considering he was slaughtered at the time. But,
fair play. Kept that quiet in the interview. There you are. He'll be laughing his head off listening to this now. So, yeah. Hey, introduce it, Chrissy, and go for it, young.
So, over to Mr. James Haydon. So great to be joined by James Haydon on the podcast. How are you doing, James?
Yeah, very good. Enjoying the lockdown like all of us. So, we're all doing all right, thank you. And you and yours?
Hold on, enjoying the lockdown. What secrets have you got at home? Or are you willing to discuss that on air?
Well, yeah, it's not quite.
We're all friends here, James. Come on, tell me what details. I think that's what the country needs, and you're providing it in the commentating game. Any sexual antics, ideally, but anything you're willing to discuss, that's ideal.
Yeah, I'm not sure the wife will be too keen on me spreading that on the podcast, but we've been keeping ourselves busy. 3 kids, new little dog, a little bike restoration, and loads of DIY, and just doing those sort of general things, really. But I think, like most of us, it's sort of you're reaching. I can't wait for it to for us to be lifted really now, but it is what it is.
I tell you what, before we jump into your past and obviously how you've got to the man himself, James Haydon, what bike you rebuilding then?
So it's a little 1991 Honda RS125, exactly like I used to race back in the British Championship. And yeah, I bought one it's probably about 5 years ago. It was in a crate coming back from Japan, and I was buying the TZ250, and I saw it in there, and I was like, do you know what, I'll have that. And I thought, I'll restore that, and it's done nothing. It's sat in my garage for like 5 years in the corner, and then with this extra time, I thought, do you know what, this is the perfect time to do that, and it gives you a bit of head space and gets out. I've never actually restored a motorcycle before either, so I watched Whittam do it, and he does it every week and makes it look so easy. And I thought, you can't get much more simple than a little single cylinder 125 2-stroke. They're nice to work on. So so I've sort of, it's all stripped down and in boxes, and I've made all the lists of parts, but there is obviously the danger that it might just stay in those boxes and it will just be one of those things. But no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to definitely restore it.
I've been following the updates on your Twitter page actually, and seeing you strip it down and stuff. So yeah, I'll be looking forward to seeing that getting all rebuilt. But obviously, before the interview, I had a quick look through your career history and whatever, and we actually had Neil Hodgson on the podcast last week. So it was interesting to see that you and Neil started in exactly the same championship back in 1990. What's it called? The British Mini Stock.
Yeah, the Mini Stocks. Yeah, little TZR 125s, and we had actually raced against each other in motocross. We were both in the top 14 motocross sort of before that, but didn't know each other, and then we became great friends in mini stocks. And it was a great championship as well, really competitive, some good names sort of coming through that, and it was just a great class to start racing. I mean, we knew nothing about it. I was there with my dad, who was a doctor. He'd never raced, and I finished second in the championship that year, and it's narrowly missing out on the win, and really loved it. Obviously became great friends with Neil, it was good days.
I tell you what, that is a fantastic competitive edge. Your dad's a doctor. You know what I mean? It's just like, right, son, hey, don't worry about the high sides. I've got painkillers at home. You know what I mean? Just don't, tell you what, son, he's a little bit of a shit. Just stick it up on the inside and you'll knock his collarbone clean off. This is how you do it. I bet Neil Hodgson crapped his pants when he saw your name on the grid. Thought, here comes the butcher doctor's son. There you are.
Yeah, so obviously. It was nice, really. Just Neil, obviously, very easygoing guy, and we were from opposite ends of the country, but we just became great friends, and we would hang around like you did then. You'd be, the racing was one bit of it, but then we'd be off on our mini bikes and hacking about and just causing mayhem.
Get some good girls. Obviously, a lot of the people that we interview on the podcast and speak to, a lot of them get into racing because either their dads used to race or they're from a racing family. What was the inspiration for yourself to get into the racing?
Well, that was the funny thing. We didn't actually know anyone who'd raced. My dad had never raced, and it was, so it was really difficult in that way because I kind of had to learn everything myself. There was no one kind of holding my hand for those early years, but equally said in another way, it was lovely because coming through motocross, so you get these motocross dads who are like beating their sons. My mum and dad would just go, "Did you enjoy that?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I loved it," and it was sort of, so there was no pressure. So when we got to road racing, it was, it was just a different thing. And when you mentioned mini stocks, I mean, I was leading that championship, and I crashed on, I think it was the second to last race. It was the one that cost me the championship. And we came in, I was like, Dad, the tyres don't feel so good. And we'd ran we'd bought the bike with those tyres on, and they still looked all right. We'd run the whole season on those tyres, right? And it wasn't until someone else came and fed them at the end, touched them at the end. You went, oh my God, they're rock hard. You need to put new tyres on it. We have new tyres every race, and we were like, what? So it was things like that you really sort of learn, and so it was a bit it was a steep learning curve, but in another way, it was quite nice. So I didn't have to live up to anyone's shadow, and as I say, it was just purely as a real enjoyment, and I just I was obsessed with motorcycles. I just loved them, and my dad had road bikes and off-road bikes. He'd never raced, but he enjoyed tinkering on them, and I was his little helper in the garage, and he loved cars and he loved motorbikes, and I'm the same. I grew up with a massive love for cars and motorbikes, and that's thankfully it's still there. I love them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you finished second in that championship. Was that to Neil? Did Neil win, or?
No, he didn't actually. No, Neil didn't win. So I can't remember where Neil finished. Fourth or fifth, I think. It was won by a chap called Mark Norman, a really nice Welsh lad who I went on to ride Supersport against as well. Unfortunately, he was killed at I think it was Aberdare, but yeah,
Aberdare the road race. Sorry.
Yeah. So then the next year, but he was it was good, and it's funny actually because Neil often says Neil had been taken out. We didn't really know each other that well. He'd been taken out at Snetterton, and him and his dad I was walking past, and they were having this almighty argument, and they were pitting. It was the Saturday. The racing was. There was one race on Saturday, one race Sunday. They were going home. They were arguing and whatever. And I stopped. I said, "Listen, by the way, it wasn't." I said, "I saw that accident. It wasn't Neil's fault." I kind of got my nose in there. Never had spoken to Mark, Neil's dad, and they eventually pulled the bike out because of what I'd said. And Neil said to me years after, he said, "Do you know what? I was hating road racing then." He goes, "And I think if we'd gone home that day." He goes, I think I'd have probably quit road racing. And he said, you coming over and saying it wasn't my fault, and me and my dad got over it and we pulled it back out. He said, because it had just been, he used to love motocross, but I'd hated road racing so far. And that's the way it was heading. He says, I think you were, really, it was really, so I think that changed that changed the way we were heading with
it. So when he won the world championship, did he split the check with you?
Likely. He did
I'd be ringing him up going, right? Yeah. Years ago, we're down in that pit lane when I saved your ass, son. Slide it over, and that's what you owe me. That's what I'd be saying.
Yeah, I know. I was. No, we went out for dinner that night. We were in Holland, and we had a real good meal and lots of beers and celebrated. At the end of the day, I've never, begrudged anyone. Neil deserved that. And it was great to see him go on and win a world championship. I wish I had one myself, but I don't.
One of the quick fire questions that we had with Neil last week was about if you could, like, a dream night out, if you could pick 5 like sort of racing pals to take out, and you featured straight away on that list. So does that have you had a few colourful nights out with Neil over the years?
Oh yeah, definitely. Lots of them. Some of which I can't tell you about. Some of which I can.
No. Don't listen to this podcast. I'm serious. It's literally you, me, and Chrissy. So if you want to say any stories, crack on.
No, but we've had lots of fun over the years. I mean, I remember when he first came down, and I think he was 17, and he just got his test, and it was the off season. He come down and stay with me down where I am, and I'd taken him to this club near where we were in High Wycombe, which is like a bit of a dive, but it was like a good night out, and it was quite rough as well. So you had to like be on your toes. I lost him. I'm like, Christ, I was with a load of boys. Like, where's Neil? He's under my wing, and then we spotted him in the middle of the dance floor on one of the podiums. Absolutely going for it. Oh, he's all right. There he is, James. Oh, okay. No worries. Sweet.
And then obviously going on from the British mini stock up to British GP 125s, obviously a full British championship again, like alongside Neil in the same championship. Was that like the equivalent of BSB now? So like a full national.
Yeah, it was. So it was like really good guys. You had like, Rob Orme, Steve Patcher, me back for some. Robert Dunlop was the man. He was absolutely flying. But it was full on British Championship. It was my first year. I'd started the year before club racing, and then here I was in the British Championship 125s. But I was getting in the top 10. I qualified on pole at Brands. Lots of crashes, learning a bit. I was also riding a RGV 250 super sport bike in super teams alongside John McGuinness, Dave Jeffries. There was a whole load of us who were sort of in that as well. That was the same year. So that was a good fun year. It was a good fun year. I learned a lot, and it was nice to ride two very different bikes. Really getting a different feel for it, and as I said, I just loved it.
Mm-hmm. And then moving up to the 250 the year after with Team Great Britain, and did Ron Haslam come in with some sort of did he sort of guide your career a little bit earlier on?
Yeah, well, that was where I was really, my dad was a doctor, and he was quite sensible about in education and how you should go forward. And the deal that I'd done with him, he wanted me to, because I just couldn't wait to get out of school. I'd had 9 GCSEs, all ECs, all A's, B's and C's, but, I went to a good school, but I was like, I just wanted to get out, earn money. I wanted to race bikes. And he was like, we had some arguments because he was like, you can't do that, and I was like, I can, I want to, why not? Everyone goes through a poo. Why it's different? Why are they different? Why can't they, so, and, so I was like, he goes, in the end, he says, all right, do you know what I'll do? He goes, I'm going to help you for 2 years, right? So, but if you're not picked up and sponsored after 2 years, then you have to promise me you're going to go back, you'll do your A levels, go to college or university or whatever, and go from there. So that was the deal we did. So at the end of that 1991, I was like, shit. I was like, there was nothing. There was a few bits and bobs. I had some good rides, and won a lot of races in super teams, and done quite well, but nothing was coming up. Then Ron Haslam got in touch, and Donington Park, who ran the Grand Prix, wanted to try and get some British riders in the Grand Prix. They'd looked at Team Italia, and they were going to start this team called Team Great Britain. Yamaha were going to give some Yamahas. Ron Haslam was going to run the team and be a mentor, and then they picked 8 of the most promising riders to go and test. So we went to Donington Park. I'd never ridden a TZ250 before, and I was like, oh my word. And there was Darren Mitchell, and he was quite, obviously he was tragically killed at Brands, a few years ago. But he was a quick, already racing 250s. There was a lot of sort of good guys there, and I was this sort of little unknown kid, and but I loved it, and Ron saw something in me, and I got picked, and it was literally January the 2nd. I moved to Smalley in Derbyshire to live with the Haslams, and I went up to live with them. I lived with them for 2 years, moved out of home, and that was it. I got sponsored, and then I never looked back. So it actually worked. So I avoided having to do any more education, which was a right result. And and that was also for me. Yeah, that was, when you look back on life, it was such a special chance, such a great opportunity for me. And Ron and Anne, they are just wonderful, brilliant people. Leon was a little 8-year-old kid at the time doing motocross, and I lived there and trained there and just hung about there. And it was also different. I was a doctor's son from Buckinghamshire, and then suddenly it was like, living up there, and you're walking around with guns, shooting stuff, and you're in the canal in the summer getting flushed through the lock, and you're just out. It was just a very different kind of Huckleberry Finn style life, and for me it was just a brilliant education as well. And Ron taught me so much, and I'll be forever in debt to Ron and Anne Haslam and Robert Fennell at Donington Park, who kind of put that together for me, and really that opened the gateway for for my career. So it was yeah, it was great. And I won races that year in the British Championship, but also we were working on the bikes all the time, and we'd be stripping it down. I'd be learning to put new pistons and rings in it, set the squish, and just we were kind of doing a lot, training all the time. Ron got you really fit, but it was also just a lot of fun. Ron, you just make up games. He's like a big kid, and you'd always be doing silly stuff, and it was just brilliant. I loved it, and like I say, I will always owe them a huge amount of where I actually ended up going because of them.
I tell you what, right? Yeah, people throw this saying around far too much. It's like the fairy tale story. You have honestly just described a total fairy tale story for any racer. That sounds absolutely incredible. And there is no other way to describe it. That sounds absolutely hellish. But hey, what after you did that, how was your chat with your dad after that? Was he thinking? There's only one word for this. Did he just look at you, after you got picked by Ron Haslam, and he just looked at you and went, "Oh shit." That's the only thing I can imagine going through your dad's head.
Well, he was just, he was passing all these perspectives around for me about different colleges or different this and that. And I was like, oh dear. And then, when I got picked, obviously, listen, he was over the moon for me. He knew how much it meant to me. And, it was kind of nice. And actually, I walked out that, as I just turned 18 and never went home again. And, and it was, it was, as I say, it was a real magic thing, and I just learned so much. He was such a great role model. He was so intelligent. His bike setup, he really taught me so much about getting the best out of the motorcycle and working on the motorcycle as much as you can, until you get to race day, and then basically that's what you got. So shut up, shut your visor, and go for it. And that was the philosophy, and it was just lovely, as I say. And I just have a huge love for them. It was like I had a second set of parents.
It was great. I was at Cartagena a few weeks. Well, it was about maybe a month and a half ago, and doing a bit of testing myself. And I don't know if you're aware, but the Haslams have got like a little academy now. So they've got three lads in the Supersport 300 category and three lads on the Superstock 600s. So they've got a little through Kawasaki. Brilliant. But what made us laugh is I had a little walk up pit lane during the day, and Ron was there in his leathers, and he went out on the little 300 and then to like test the kid's bike, and then he came in and all the kids were like gathered round, and Ron was giving us feedback on like how to set the bike up. And I just thought that passion at his age to be that that involved, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. Like Leon was there and all the kids, and it was just mega to see that enthusiasm come through. It's just so good. But then obviously, look, staying on the 250 for 93. Obviously, it was a season that looking back, being fair, you should have taken the title that year. But obviously, we'll get onto that. Who was your main competitors that season?
I tell you what, that year in 250s was such an amazing year. You had two Grand Prix winners in Ian McConaughey, Alan Carter. You had Nigel Bosworth, Steve Salford. Hizzy rode it for a couple of times. You had it was a real who's who. Ian Newton. It was like just a super fast, spectacular grid, and it was good. In the first year of 92 with Ron, we were running the 91 bikes, and then we got two new bikes in 93, and I loved them. I mean, it's that, and I've got to have I don't own a 93 TZ250 yet, but I will do. But we had a really good year, and I ended up finished second in the British Championship, but I should have won it. The British Championship was 6 rounds that year. I won 3 of them. And then the BBC wanted to mount, it was at Snetterton, it was the penultimate round, and they wanted to mount the camera on my bike. I didn't want it because it involved this quite heavy unit that they kind of had to tie to underneath the back of the seat, and it probably weighed about 5 kilos. but it was old school technology, you know, and had the battery and whatever. And basically, in the race, I'm lying third, and I thought my wheel spindle was coming out because I'm getting this huge knocking, and I'm looking down and thinking something's wrong here. Now I came into Russell's, and what had happened is that camera had broken its off the mountains, and it swung in, and thank goodness it did it there, but it was probably more to do with the lack of speed, and it jammed in the back wheel, locked the back wheel, and high-sided me, and that cost me the championship.
Jeez, I bet there was a few choice words with the BBC after that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? You know, it was sort of.
Have you still got the footage?
Well, I'm sure it's there somewhere, but
I bet you don't want to watch it. I'll be like,
no,
a bad trip down memory lane anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was those days. It wasn't a live show anyway, so the thing had to kind of record it on itself. Do you know what I mean? And then they'd take it back and edit it and put it through. But that, you know, it didn't stop me. You know, it was a very strong year. You know, I set a lot of lap records. You know, I was fast. I also got a chance to ride in the British Grand Prix. You know, and I'd only been. They said, "Do you want to go in the British Grand Prix?" I was like, "Sorry, that was in '92, so I'd only been riding a couple of years." There I was on the grid of the British Grand Prix, and in '93 they got me a 500, and so you know I wasn't 19 years old doing 250s. They put me on a 500. I was the youngest ever British entrant then in Grand Prix in the top class at 19, and you know I finished 13th. You know, got in the points, and you know it was I remember it, you know, very very fondly, lining up in the grid against Kevin Schwantz, Wayne Rainey, Mick Doohan, you know, Alex Crivellet, Luca Cadalora, you know, it was boom. It was, you know, Dal Beatty, you know, and there I was, this little 19-year-old who's never ridden something like that. And it was, you know, it was an eye opener to ride one of those things because they were nasty, just all the right way. You know, it was just brilliant.
And I mean, like you say, 3 years on from riding on the tarmac for the first time ever to be, you know, in a 500 Grand Prix is incredible, and to, you know, to get in the points. And according to your Wikipedia page, you were the youngest person ever the youngest Brit at the time in history to score points, which, you know, it's unbelievable, really. Were you riding for Harris, or was it a British manufacturer you were riding for?
Yeah, no, what it was is they hired a bike from Rock. So there was Rock and Harris's, and it was Serge Rocher. He used to run the Elf project. The Ron Haslam raced in Grand Prix, and so they hired a bike from him just for the race. So I did that one. I also got in to do the last one of the year, which was quite. I ended up high siding it. They were so bloody easy to high side. They were like they were like switches, and if you just got slightly wrong, yeah, they came in on time, just mistimed it slightly. You know, they bit so quick. But the guys in that last one, it was when Schwantz won the championship, so it was a big end of season party. And I can remember him. He was so drunk, and he had his cowboy hat, and he was being carried round on someone's shoulders, and they were playing "We Are the Champions," you know, from Queen, and it was, you know, and I remember like there I was looking at Kevin Schwantz, everyone was having a great time, and I'm like, God, you know, I hope I'm there one day. But yeah, it was good. It was, you know, a good year, and as you say, you know, it was a good, you know, I was doing going forward, and it was really hard in '94 because it was like. They were like, do you want to stay and ride a 250 again? But I kind of, even though I hadn't won the championship, you know, I kind of wanted to, you know, I wanted to get on a bigger bike. I'd really enjoyed the 500, and I got offered to ride for Med on the RC45, which had just come out, the Honda RC45 in British Superbikes. Yeah. So I took that ride, and we were on Penske suspension, where you won't have heard of. They make car suspension in the States, and it was like a free deal, but the suspension was dire, and I kept crashing it. They weren't too happy, although I did win at Snetterton in the wet, by 18 seconds. So that was my first superbike win. So that was, and I was the only person. That was the first win in the world for the Honda RC45.
I'm actually just started to read Michael Rutter's book. I'm about halfway through it at the moment, and he obviously raced the RC45 for a while and at the TT and stuff. And he, in his book, he said, contrary to popular opinion, and that the RC45 was actually like a really badly handling bike, and it was really difficult to race at a good pace. Did you find, obviously I know you had the bad suspension in, but as a bike in general, did you find the geometry quite difficult?
Yeah, I did. I mean, also it was difficult because I'd got off 250s, which is so pure and nice and well balanced. So this thing that I was struggling to get it set up right. It wasn't on good suspension, and the fact was the wet's a great leveler. So in the wet, it didn't, all the foibles it had didn't come up quite as much. And whereas I'd struggled a lot with it in the dry, and so much so actually, we got to like halfway through the year, and I really wasn't enjoying it. They weren't enjoying me crashing it. And so we just both said, look, let's just go our separate ways. So we did. And then I got a phone call from a Irish 250 team in Grand Prix called Beckett's. And they were running 250 RS Hondas, very standard ones, but on Yokohamas, which were called Jokohamas then, because obviously everyone was on Dunlops. But yeah, I went out and did my first. It was the first time I'd ever raced outside the country. We got to Brno in the Czech Republic, and I actually diced all long race with Carlos Checa, and he got 15th and I got 16th. It was, but I loved it, and just outside the points, and that did enough that they said, oh, come and stay with us for the rest of the season, which was only 4 races. There was Laguna Seca, maybe Phillip Island. There was a couple more races to go, and so we did that, and then they also brought it back, and I did a couple of British Championship races, like national races on it, which I won. And so it kind of, and it was nice actually, because it kind of picked up, after sort of going a different direction with the superbike. It was nice to get back on something and get winning again. And actually, the other thing is doing quite well. The bike wasn't competitive, and I was making it. Not trying to sound big-headed, but I was doing a really good job on it, and it caught the attention of Steve Harris, who was running 500s, Harris 500s in Grand Prix. So he came to talk to me and said, look, we've been watching you, and we'd like you to get on our bike next year. So there I was. I was like 21 years old and signed up for a full year of 500 Grand Prix. I couldn't believe it. It was it was like a dream come true. And again, big learning curve. They were still that era of bike. I still think was one of the most challenging of anything, because they weighed 120 kilos. They had 150, 160 brake horsepower. And they had, they wanted to run between 8 and 12 and a half, and you got them. You got them at 7 3/4 and gave it a bit too much throttle. It hit that 8. It was like hitting a turbo, and they were so light and fidgety and snatchy, and carbon brakes. But they were just so exciting as well. And when I got mine handling good, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. My Harris at the end was a really good. I was always battling for top privateers. We had quite a few breakdowns. We had a couple of crashes, but not many. But a lot of breakdowns that year. The bike was getting a little bit old, but also qualified it sort of top privateer, and I got 10th. As the best result. Remember, there was like 14 factory bikes then as well. So it was. I had some good results on it.
Who were the other Brits in the championship back like in 95 and 96?
So Neil Hodgson. So Hodgson was Jeremy McWilliams, Eugene McManus, Sean Emmett. So there was a load of us, and we would have a right laugh. I mean, McWilliams and Emmett, they were absolutely so loose. I'd got there and I was still like a very focused professional young rider, and they're like, who like kind of like doing their best to like
lead you astray,
lead me astray and divert me off the rails. So it was a big learning curve, but it was great because we were suddenly flying around to 12 countries and just going around and doing the World Championship and riding with the best guys every week, doing right at his prime. It was a really good year. And at the end of it, it was really hard to know which way. Harris wanted to keep me, Paget's wanted to keep me, and then WCM put in an offer as well, all to stay in 500s. And WCM had been the team that Mackenzie had been in when it was Valvoline and got third at the Donington GP, and then it was the team that Hodgley was in. It was probably the best and well-funded, neatest, best set-up team in the paddock, and it was kind of. But I went to see Clive Paget, and Clive runs a good ship and a good setup, and Clive was he was good. He said, look, we haven't got much budget, and I always used to work really hard trying to get sponsors as well. I'd be going all the off season. I'd be going around all the industrial estates with my little portfolio, knocking on doors, and I'd spend weeks and weeks trying to raise money to take with me. I always had done since I was a kid. It was just, and I'd been quite successful at it. And I'd picked up a sponsor called Aquavin, which was like a plastics manufacturer from the States. And so we went up to see Clive, and he said, okay, yeah, well. I thought at that point it was between them and Harris, and I said, yeah, okay, we did a deal. We shook hands on it, and it's the only time I've ever, for me, a handshake is everything, and it's as good as a signed contract. And we shook hands, and the deal was that I could keep my leathers and helmets money. It was bringing them 25 grand, which was my Aquavin sponsorship. And obviously whatever I got prize money and whatever else I got along the way, I could keep. So that was, there we were. And then the very next day, WCM phone up, and they, the best team. I didn't realise it was going to change at that point. Had I known what I was actually getting into, I should have probably stayed. But their deal was, they were going to pay me 40 grand and I could keep my Aquavin sponsorship and I could keep my... So suddenly, actually, it was looking at the difference between sort of paying 25 grand or kind of earning 80 grand, and as a young kid, and to get on one of the best bikes, it was a really, I phoned Clive up that very next day. I said, look, Clive, I feel terrible. I've never done this before. But it was also, we had only shook hands the day before. It wasn't like weeks had gone down the line, or they were getting contracts ready. But I just said, look, I can't. It is a career, isn't it? You are there to make money, and the difference between bringing somebody that money or actually having a chance to earn some money, and that allowed me to buy my first house, and so it was kind of things that. So, but I felt kind of terrible. It's the only time in my career, that I've ever done something like that, and I felt awful for it. And but at the same time, it was financially it was 100% the right decision. The only problem was in WCM, what it turned out afterwards was Peter Clifford. They were the slots. If you weren't going to be in Grand Prix then, it was all changing. You were going to lose your slot, and he needed a team to be in there. He had lost all his mechanics, the workshops, the whole lot, and then basically just suddenly needed the team to run. So what we got was these new guys who were working literally out of a shed. Nice guys, but well out of their depth in Grand Prix. Really didn't know what they were doing, to be honest. And worst of all, Dunlop pulled out of Grand Prix, so the whole grid had to be on Michelin's. This team had run on Dunlops the whole time, and you can imagine suddenly the whole grid on Michelin's, you just got crap. This is the days of the tyre wars. So, we just got such rubbish tyres. The only time I got a decent tyre was for the French Grand Prix, when obviously Michelin had enough of the good ones to go round. And I got ninth there. That was my best result of the year. But I couldn't get on with that bike on Michelin's. We didn't have any money for testing, so you're turning up on racing. The bike, all the settings that they did have, none of them worked for these Michelin's. It was a real crappy year, and then it ended up that I had a big crash at the Italian Grand Prix and broke my ankle, and then that kind of took the end of that season. And I must admit, I was really a bit disheartened at the end of that year, because, it was a bike I rode, but I can't say I ever properly raced. Do you know what I mean? It was that unfriendly, and that, I just wasn't able to. I was just never comfortable on it, and I was never allowed the chance to be comfortable on it. And we had so many little crappy mistakes. So difficult year, that, really difficult. Even though I got some top tens.
It seems looking through, there's like so many years where you were kind of on the right bike in the wrong year, or finally got a break, and then they got the wrong tires, or do you know what I mean? Like speaking to Neil, he was saying about how much luck was involved within his career, in some years for him, and in some years against, like not in his favour, but it seems there was a lot of times where you seem to be unlucky. Moving on to 97, what inspired the switch to World Superbikes?
Just really, I couldn't, I wasn't, the bikes, these custom Yamahas were getting older and older, and all the rest of the bikes are moving on to be the big bangs, I also a couple of years of like absolutely putting everything on the line to finish 9th or 10th. I wanted more than that, and I couldn't see at that time it was a very bleak time for English riders or British riders in the Grand Prix, because it was all tobacco sponsorship or Repsol sponsorship, and they didn't have markets in the UK. For most of those, Ducados or whatever, or Repsol, so they didn't want English riders on their bikes, and I couldn't see a way into getting into a good team quickly, and it was all about success for me and winning and dicing for the lead, and actually it wasn't enough for some people. It was enough to be in Grand Prix, to just say I'm in Grand Prix and I'm doing Grand Prix, but it wasn't for me. And I got offered what was Paolo Casale's Ducati riding World Superbike. Colin Schiller from Fast Bikes, he said, right, they wanted 25 grand. And Colin Schiller said, yeah, we'll pay that, because I was doing quite a lot of stuff for Fast Bikes. So when we went out to sign the contract, he didn't turn up, right? So I had to sign a contract. It was, it wasn't my wisest move. It was all in Italian, and I was like, and I was like, the guy
when you're picking up his pizza and pasta.
Yeah, I was like, okay. The guy sort of he interpreted it for me, but it was, Casale done quite well on it. Got on the bike, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was a brilliant bike, and I broke the lap record of Cartagena in pre-season testing. There was a guy called Gregorio Lavia there who I'd never heard of, and I was quicker than him. And I was feeling really good about the season. I just loved the motorcycle. And then we got to the first round at Phillip Island, and they've sold it. The bikes are gone, and and I can't remember whether it was, I think that was maybe a 95 bike in 97. You weren't allowed to mix chassis and engines. They all had to be of the same year. And then it was either the 96, it was whichever the one that Foggy and Keeley, no one could get on with. That was either the 96 or the 97 bike, but that's the one that they'd got. So they'd got rid of Casley's ones that worked beautifully, got me what they thought were the better ones, but they were the ones that Foggy no one could get on with. And actually, Foggy ended up going back to his, I can't remember, like I say, it's a 95 or 96 bike. But, I got there, and this thing, it was actually turned out they'd made it too rigid. It was miles too stiff, the chassis was too stiff, the swing arm was too stiff, and it was just horrid. And I was heartbroken because I just loved this. I'd loved the bike that I had been riding. And we had so many. I think we had 40-something mechanicals, including practice and stuff. And the guy that was running my bike, he'd been a moped mechanic in Rome, right? And he was suddenly running a factory, like a sort of semi-factory Ducati. And when we got a brand new engine for San Marino, 2 brand new engines from the factory to upgrade us. Well, he seized the first one in the pit lane before he went out because he didn't put any oil in it, right? And so that was one factory engine, right? I mean, that tells you the level we're going at. And then the second one, he forgot to tighten up the sump plug, and he came out, and I had a massive high side, prolapse on my shoulder, and popped my clavicle forever, and so it was that. I had fairings coming off, and it was just calamity after calamity. Then we were at Albacete. I got my best result of when the one time I did, I got 7th in Sugo in Japan, but it was a shit bike, a shit team, and I got to Albacete, and in practice there's like a fast 4th gear left-hander, and you're nailed, you're on it there. It's like probably 110, 20 mile an hour, and it's bang in, boof, and my clip-on, just as I was going it, just came loose and shot forward, right? And so I've just gone up on the grass, massive tank slapper. It was, I just managed to keep it up, but it shit me up like mad. Went back in. I was like going crazy, and they're like, oh, sorry. And in the race, it did exactly the same thing again, right? And I could not in that place. It was in a slower corner. Same thing happened. I just drove it to the barrier, right? I just chucked it on the floor, right? Stepped on it, climbed over the barrier, walked to my motorhome. I was still in all my gear, everything, right? I put my moped on the back of the... no, I didn't actually. I left my moped, my helmet bag, everything in the garage. Right? I just undid my lead, put it in, got in my motorhome. I started everything on, started up, and I drove out the circuit. I was like, these guys can fuck off. Right? And it wasn't until I was about 5 k's down the road that I took my helmet off, right? And I was still like seething, right? So I was in my leathers on. I'm just like driving down the road. Next, get like a call like half an hour later. They're like, James, where are you? And I was like, you guys can go fucking suck it, right? I was like, I said, what the hell? I said, I've had enough. You're going to kill me. I said, it's a joke. I said, you can't bloody, it's just an absolute joke. I said, I'm not going to ride it anymore. You're going to kill me. I'm not prepared to do it, so shove it up your ass.
Well played, that man. Well played.
Yeah. So, well, it wasn't because they then, little did I know, but they had, from this Italian contract that I'd signed, Colin Schiller from Fast Bikes never came up with the money. So I got a thing through from them saying, look, you owe us 25 grand, which I just ignored, as one does. So then, but I'd done enough to then, it was like, I thought, I just don't want to, I want to ride so I can win, and Paul Denning had got in touch. He'd seen me ride, a 500 Grand Prix at Donington when I was up with the top guys and had a coming together with Abe when we both crashed. But, he'd seen me ride a few bit over the years. And he said, look, why don't you come ride with us in, BSB? At least you'll be able to dice for it. So, came back, in the first race I got third at Brands. And, and I was teammates with Terry Reimer. And do you know what? What a fun year that was. We had, the bikes weren't great. They were just a very standard GSXR, and you were racing the ex-factory World Superbikes of the Bruce Yamaha boys. So they were difficult. You couldn't really quite compete in the dry. But again, I won in the wet at Silverstone, got another win, and had a lot of laughs. Terry Reimer was my teammate, and what a great teammate he was. We got on really well, had a lot of fun.
Not if you ask the security guard at Brands Hatch, mind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, he's not scared of old Terry. That was a funny one, short fuse, but it was good. But it was also, I was kind of just starting up and whatever, and he was more towards the end, and he had a beautiful Ferrari 355 Berlinetta, which was like one of my dream cars, and I still love them now. And but it was also, you never saw people drive. When we were at first drive we went for, I remember we were coming down to a roundabout. There's like two sort of 15-year-olds in their hoodies walking along, and we just come down like bing bing down into second. Tell you, he's a good driver, just boom, nailed it, and we just kicked it sideways. Bah, 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 bah. Smoke gushing off the rear tires, right? And we've come past these two lads whose jaws have dropped on the pavement as this Ferrari. Just, you never see them gym like that, do you? They're always potted around by old men, but we smoked this thing. And I remember just seeing these two lads thinking, wicked. I was like, yes, Terry. But it was good. And again, what a championship Superbikes was then. You had the likes of Bayliss, Hodgson, Toseland, Hislop, John Reynolds, Emmett, Steve Hislop. It was a real world class, a very, very top grid. Which goes on to show, where some of these guys went on to win 5-6 World Superbike championships, and so it was a really good. It was a great place to be cutting your teeth, because it was a kind of a world championship in a British championship setting, and there was a lot of good bikes.
I've been whilst being on lockdown, I've been spending a bit of time actually going back and watching old BSB races from that sort of era, and I've been really enjoying watching old races and stuff. Well, obviously having Neil on the podcast last week, we're discussing the sort of 2000 year, and obviously Neil versus Chris for the championship in the end, and talking about that famous race at Donington Park at the end of the season. A lot of people obviously forget that at the beginning of that season you were actually leading the championship, and you were involved in that car crash. Can you just tell us the sort of story behind that and what exactly happened?
Yeah, I mean, bloody hell, talk about unlucky. I was actually a passenger in my manager's 911, and we were going down the M1, and there was a pile-up right in front of us, and we were like the third to last car. It was 21 cars, and basically went smack. And I turned round to look to see, and just as I turned around, we got smacked, and I didn't know at the time, because I was turned, and because of the impact, it prolapsed 2 discs in my neck in C4 and C5, and my neck felt a bit sore, but we're motorcycle racers, right? So, I just didn't really think anything of it. I was all right. These days, people be like, oh, take me, sue this, sue that. But I had a stiff neck, crack on. And I started waking up a few days later with with like dead arms, tingly hands. My hands were going dead and my feet, and I just was having these really weird symptoms, but I didn't put two and two together. But the next race, it started to bother me. I was, like you said, I was leading the championship. I think it was about halfway through. I was still leading it, and then we got to, at its worst, was Alton Park, and I mean, I think Hodgson might have still won it on that day anyway. He was incredible. He came from the back to win that race, but I had, I think, a couple of seconds lead, but my arm, I was struggling with it like mad. I've been limiting my practice, but a lot of people always like to say when they've got a weakness, oh, I'm riding with this, I'm riding with that. I never would tell anyone anything because I just didn't like people to think I was weak. So I would not. All my injuries, you never heard, oh, James Haydon's injured. You just didn't hear it. You know, everyone was always like, oh, you bounce really well. They used to call me Rubber Man. But, like, you know, actually, a lot of the time, that was, you know, it wasn't like that at all. But I just didn't like to let on, you know, I was hurting. But that race, my arm was going so dead. I was out on the straight when you come out of, it's the run up to Ireland or Cascades on the run up to Ireland. I could not hold the throttle there with my right hand, so I was having to use my left hand to hold the throttle full, right, and then put my wrist up and hook it on the back of my glove to keep it full because my arm had gone so dead. I was having real problems with that, and I knew if I told, you know, people, then I wasn't going to be allowed to ride, and it caused me a couple of rounds of really big problems until eventually we managed to find this special they're called Mackenzie trained physio, and they manipulated through really hard physiotherapy in certain ways. You know, they're like bars of soap in between your vertebrae, and it got taken back, and it was impinging on my spinal cord, which was giving the nerves. It was only a couple of millimeters away from you know, from being in a really bad spot. So, you know, listen, would I have won it? Yeah, who knows? Maybe not. Maybe what? Yeah, you can. And I've never been one. Do you know what? I've had a wicked life. I'm still having a wicked life, right? So I was kind of like, you can't. I've never been one to go, oh, this could have happened or that could happen. I am where I am. Also, I'm in one piece. You know, I lost a lot of friends along the way. So things like this. So yeah, sometimes you think, oh God, if only, but in another way, it was just part of what it was. You know, that was kind of how that year was. I mean, the biggest thing for me on that year was, you know, I'd got on the Ducati and it was like cheating. I could not believe it. I was like, you bastards, you've all been on these, right? I've been riding these 750s and you've been on these thousands, right? And the difference was, it was just such a subliminal, it was an incredible, you thought it did it. It was easy. You didn't have to have your line. You could square it off from anyway. It was just you know, I just couldn't believe how much better it was. And so that was really cool. And then going into the penultimate round, it was Hodgson, Walker, me, and Reynolds that could still win it. And me and Reynolds has fallen out massively because he had put me on the curbs coming over Clay Hill in what I thought was a real dangerous move on the inside, and I'd lost the front. And how I didn't go down and kill myself there, I will never know. And we had really fallen out over that incident because I was like, well, you can nearly fucking kill me. And that was the one where obviously they touched. We came through to get first and second, and Hodgson then got third, and that was the one that I went to Coulton. But we, after that, so we got to Brands, and Reynolds is ahead of me in the championship. But you know, in this series, anything can happen. Ben Atkins says, right, James, you've got to finish behind John in both races. And I'd actually done a deal to go to the next year to go World Superbikes with INS Ducati with Colin Wright, and Hodgson. So I was like, fine, okay, that's what we're going to do it. And the first race was, it was lashing it down. And there was loads of us all together. And Reynolds, it was Reynolds, Rutter, McPherson, maybe Plater. There was a whole gang of us dicing out that went from like six. You could be the second or ninth. So it was also an almost impossible race to try and get your one teammate through on. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like it's you and him and just wave him through, because every time someone came past, there'd be 5 other riders through. And we came into, but I was very much right, I've got to let him win. And we came into Druids, and Reynolds came and he just smacked me up on the curbs at Druids, right? To just bang me out the way. Well, I got up there, the front end immediately tucked on, it's got a big raised painted curb. It tucked, slid down, gripped again, and lifted me back up. But I was like, "Fuck you!" Right? I was like,
I'm
no
not having
way.
that, princess.
I'm saying, I'm not. That is not happening, right? So I was like, right. So I raced him for that race, right? And
I can imagine that being horrendous, mate. Now, the only time I've seen you race was Goodwood Festival Speed, right?
Yeah.
And I've never seen a more angry style on a motorcycle in me damn life. So I can imagine the cautions you're about to dish out in this story. Sorry for interrupting, but I'm trying to paint a picture for all our listeners. This man here. I feel sorry for your wife, because you must deliver some goods, mate. I'm telling you.
So, but yeah, I mean, the point was, I always gave 100% on the motorcycle. That was my thing, and I know that was, it cost me a lot of races for sometimes crashing, but also won me races that I shouldn't have been able to win, and it was the only way I knew how. And if I'd probably been a better racer, if I could have backed it off a fraction and not been quite as committed, but that was the only way I knew. But I was also a very fair racer. You weren't one that you saw me knocking people off or banging into them and sending them wide. My moves were normally very clean, and but I raced people as they raced me. So you raced me fair, I raced you fair. You raced me like a killer, I raced you like a killer. And it was yeah. And but basically, to cut a long story short, I beat him, and when I got back to the garage, it's only a few points anyway. It was like one position, but there was something like 6 of us within 0.3 of a second. So it was a very hard one to do, and I just but Ben Atkins was livid. You're not riding for us anymore. Da, 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 you can't ride. Da, da. So Roger Marshall called him down, and it hadn't been a great meeting for us. Hodgie and Walker looked way out in front, and Reynolds I could still mathematically win it the last round, but it would needed them to all have a big crash and be taken out in one of the races, I think, or if not 2. So I got there. Ben says to me, last round of the year, don't you dare beat John. You ride round behind John, and if you do anything else, you're not riding in the second race. So that's what I did. So I stuck behind John, and that's a really hard thing to do. It was the first time in my life I've ever done that, and it's not a natural way to race, to not take the opportunities where you can. And so I kind of stuck behind him for a bit, and then I kind of like dropped off a fraction and finished kind of 4th, or lonely 4th, and hated it. And so Ben came up to me, thank you for finishing behind him, and he said, right, exactly the same again this race, you must stay behind him. Well, it's the last fucking race of the year, right? What are you going to do? I'd already signed to go with GCSE to World Championship. So anyway, I just went out and smoked everyone. Won the race, and there was nothing he could do. Got back in, and I was like, brilliant. And And then later that evening, Colin Wright came up to me and said, we were all done. We were, we had to sign the contract the next day. And he said, no, you're not having it. And I was like, what? And he goes, no, if you can't follow team orders, then you're not having the ride. And this had been a negotiation going on for 4 months. And I said, look, Colin, I can follow team orders, but if someone's going to try and kill me and knock me on the curbs and not, I knew what my job was to do, but I'm not going to be treated like that. And actually, none of what I did in the last 2 rounds made the distinct difference to where the championship ended up anyway. But actually, so that cost me that ride in World Superbikes. And James Toseland got that ride and went on to win 2 world championships. So that was a fucking
big kick in the balls.
big kick in the balls, man. But
have you spoke to Colin like years later? Was the sort of water under the bridge, or is it still quite hostile? Or
well, it was kind of I mean, it was what it was. It kind of, I was stunned, but there was no change in his mind. I begged to please him, but I read this week, or I listened to one of his stories on Twitter, and, he wouldn't have, Scott Smart, because he didn't like the colour of his hair. And, he didn't let him have the chance to dye it back or do anything. It was like, no, you're not having it now. You've got a silly haircut. So, he could be quite pickle. He loved his power. He was a great team manager, but, he didn't half like to wield his stick. So, and the way I look at it is, do you know what? That was a great chance. And maybe I'd have gone on to be a world champion had I had that road. But also, maybe I'd have gone on and been killed. Maybe I'd, do you know what I mean? You never know. And actually, do you know what? I don't, I've never had a proper job. I've raced bikes all around. I've got a lovely wife, 3 great kids. We live in a nice house. I'm having fun, So it's kind of, I don't, it's sort of like, there's things I wish.
Things have worked out anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it's just sort of, I wish I'd been a world champion. I wish I'd been a British champion, but I wasn't. But, was I competitive with all these guys? There's anyone that went on to win a world championship that we grew up racing. I beat them as many times as they beat me most of the time. I never got a decent bike in world championship. That was the main thing for me. I only got a privateer bike and what have you. So that was that. 2001, I'd signed for Virgin Mobile Yamaha with Rob Mack, and that was a great year. The R7 was such a gorgeous scalpel of a bike. You could dissect it, but it was difficult to race with the Ducatis because it had no torque, so you really had to run it through the turns and get the thing out, whereas the Ducatis could stop it and just go brah and like pop their ways out. So if you could get a clear lap, you could be gone. But if you were dicing with them, it was a very difficult bike to be competitive on. But Rob Mack and Adrian and all my team were just such lovely guys. I really enjoyed riding for them, and I really enjoyed that bike. I must admit, I had some trick bits on it. I had like Nori Hager's factory magnesium forks, with his initials stamped in them. I had some like cool stuff on it, and we had a good year. I think I had 18 podiums that year. It was a really, really strong year. I had a major fuck up when I crashed at Mallory Park when I was in the lead with just a couple of laps to go. That was a bit of a pisser. But I was.
Did you get much of a bollocking off Rob Mack for that one?
A little bit. It was more just utter disappointment. But it was, Reynolds was closing me down a little bit, and it was funny at Mallory because you can see him kind of coming in as you're coming out, and he looked much. I kind of, I was like, oh, yeah, I thought he was coming into me a bit, and there was a back marker coming into the S's, and I knew I could just about get him. I knew if I got him, there was no way Reynolds would get him because he wouldn't meet him to the hairpin. That was just going to cock him up, and I was just a little bit too brave on the front, and it tucked. And that was actually one of the very, very few times I ever crashed out of the lead. But it was a hideous one, and it was embarrassing. But it was, it was what it was. And actually, that bike, I loved it so much, so I've agreed to buy it at the end of the year off Rob Mack. And also I picked up Iowa sponsorship that year, so I brought Iowa into motorcycle racing, and they ended up staying in motocross, and I had some really cool sponsors that year. Iowa, I had HRO in Porsche, Breitling, despite my usual stuff, and I brought Joe Rocket into the UK, and I was getting paid really, really well. I was one of the highest paid in the UK, for where I was, and I had to finish third in the, I think I had to finish fifth in the last round to get third in the championship. And there was also like a 25 grand bonus for this and 10 grand. It was still important bonuses for me, and the bike had not missed a beat, and it's I think I was running in second or third, and then the crank blew on the second to last lap. So that was that, and I dropped to fourth, so I missed out on my bonuses. And because it put the rod through the cases, and also I've always learned, you want to buy a racing bike, you buy it as you wheel it off the track. You don't let someone go home and take all the good bits off it. And even with Rob Mack, I was like, so I wanted my Nori Haga forks, I wanted my trick rear shock, I wanted my special factory Belgada swinging arm. But it like put the crank, it was fucked. It needed a complete rebuild. So they're like, look, we'll take it home, rebuild it for you, and have it back. And I was like, just make sure you do. And then when I got in touch with them a few weeks later, Rob Mack had sold it, bastard. So that was that. So that was the R7 was gone. And then that next year I was like, right, so Yamaha offered me a really good contract to stay with them. They were bringing in the R1. Suzuki, Paul Denny was back with the GSX R1000. That was a really good deal. I got good deals. I'd had a really good season on that Yamaha because it wasn't the best bike. It handled brilliantly, but it wasn't. It was nothing like the Ducatis. And so I had pretty much a pick of the bunch. And then Fogarty comes up and says, James, do you want to come and have a look at this Petronas? And I was like, no, not really. New bike. And I hadn't really warmed to Carl Fogarty too much. He was an amazing rider, but he blanked me the first couple of times I'd met him and tried to say hello. And I just hadn't really, I just wasn't sure he was going to be the sort of person I wanted to race under. But he said, look, James, come up, have a look. I went to Neil Hodgson's wedding. I sat next to Neil Mackenzie. Mackenzie's like, oh my God, I've just been testing that Petronas. It is the fastest thing I've ever been on. It's all Formula One technology. You've got to preheat the oil before you even start it because the tolerances are so tight. It's a bloody missile. And he said, you get a chance to ride it. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Spoke to Corsa, and Corsa's like, well, I think I'm going to ride it. I think it's going to be a really good bike. So I went to see Foggy, and he says, look, what we'll do, we're probably not going to do that much riding and superbikes in the first year, but because they've been developing this MotoGP bike, you're probably going to do 8 or 10,000 Ks of testing. So you'll be really race sharp for the next season. So I thought, okay, the money was really good. And I thought, I was kind of in and out. I thought Carl Fogarty, after everything he's done, he's such a world champ. I thought he's going to make sure that's going to work. I'll trust him on that. So got there, and it turned from sort of bad to worse in that we didn't turn a wheel in that first year at all. And I was right at the top of my game. I was 28, 29, feeling phenomenal, super fit. And it was just a nightmare. I didn't realise how much I missed it. It was like having no legs. I just couldn't. It was just horrible. So then Carl Harris broke both his legs at Alton Park on the factory Suzuki, and it on round 3. So Paul Dennings phoned me up and said, James, come and ride the Suzuki. You're not doing anything. It's ideal. It gives you the chance to test it against the what you're going to be up against. Keeps you race fit. You're not riding. Jobs are good. And so I phoned Carl, and Carl's like, no. I said, look, Carl, please, I've got to do this. He's like, no. And the contract I'd signed was a Petronas Formula One contract. It was 82 pages long. And I tried to get out of it, and I couldn't, basically. I couldn't without, it was going to cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds for a buyout clause. And I went to, I said, look, Carl, please, this is everything. He's like, no. And that was one of my real low points in my life, because all I wanted to do was race motorbikes, and I couldn't. And I was stuck at home. I was earning quite a lot of money doing absolutely nothing. The only good thing was the World Cup was on, and so I watched the World Cup in the pub while playing pool with most of my mates, and instead I completely debaucherous few months over the World Cup, and then we sort of got training again for the next year. I had a bit of problems. I was racing in the Florida go-kart championship with some friends, and they didn't know this, but I flipped it and I broke the head off my humerus, which is obviously the bone goes in the socket of your shoulder. It's a really bad injury. So I was like, shit. And so then that was they were saying at first they were going to have to do it and plate it and do it and ball it and wreck the lining, and that was going to have to be stapled in, and it's a really nasty injury. So I kept that one completely silent, didn't tell, nobody knew. And then when we got going, the bike was shit, right? It was just awful. And what had happened is Michelin had come back and they'd said, look, Michelin were going to support the factory team of Hodgson and Tozen, Hodgson and Laconi. I think it's maybe Hodgson and Laconi. They were supporting those guys, and they had only had one more set of those because they'd been out of it for a year or two, and they hadn't made tyres since it was the Bayliss-Collins Colin Edwards battle. So they only had enough for 3 riders. So Carl said, look, what happens? So the factory team are having him, and we've got one more set, right? And they were like 3 years different to the other ones, and they were head and shoulders above. This is when they were making triple tiles, different sidewalls each, different middles. And he said the guy that's fastest in the first session gets the tyres, and it goes like that. Well, obviously, Coulter, ex-world champion, he'd been to all the World Superbike circuits. I'd been to a few of them, a few Grand Prix circuits, but there's quite a few I'd never been to because they were different and they'd changed. And so he just was, he was quicker than me. He was getting the tyres, and I was starting to, for the first time ever, I was starting to doubt myself. I was like, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am, because I was really struggling to stay with him. And then we got to Brands, and I outqualified him in the first session. I am over the moon. So I've gone to get my first time that year. I was getting a set of the proper factory Michelins, and Bosworth goes, no. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, no. He goes, he's ahead of you in the championship, so he's keeping him now. I was like, Nigel, stop. I said, we've got to deal. No, that's the way it is. Don't argue with me. Right. So I went to see Foggy, and I said, look, Carl, look, obviously we've done this deal. This is a deal. It's the first time I qualified ahead. And it's you got to let me have these tyres. He said, James, to be honest, I thought I was going to be really interested in all this, but he goes, I'm just a figurehead, and he goes, I'm not really bothered. And I went,
Never.
you're not really bothered. And he goes, no, I'm sorry. And I go, Carl, this is my fucking life. This is everything I've dreamed of, everything I've worked on since I was 8-year-old kid, and then you are not bothered. No. And he used to have all his mates, and they'd all be partying in the truck, and so that was that. And my bike had, well, I jumped off it 4 times because it was in flames, completely engulfed in flames. Right. I had more oil leaks. I crashed. I was turning into a nervous wreck if my foot slipped off, because the bike would run perfectly, but it would fill the airbox up with oil, even though it would still run perfectly. And the first thing you know about it, when it would be lapping over the top of the airbox onto the tyre, and if you caught it, or if it got on your foot pegs, you're all right, or if not, the first thing you know, it would either burst into flames when it hit the exhaust, or you'd be upside down. And so, I was having terrible, and we got to the airport. I was living in Andorra. I was the first English rider to be out there living over there, basing myself there. And we went into Barcelona, and it's off to Germany. And I I've only cried in front of my wife. I just burst in tears in the airport. I said, do you know what, Joe? This bike is going to fucking kill me. Right? And she's like, no, don't be silly. I said, I can't go. I said, I'm not kidding you. That bike is going to kill me or disable me. Right? I said, I don't want to ride it. I'm not going. She's like, look, you're a professional motorcycle racer. You've got to go. We're in the airport. The flight's taken off an hour. I said, I got such a bad feeling. She's like, no, don't be silly. So anyway, we get there, and I jump off. It has an oil failure first off. Catches on fire really badly in the second one, and I couldn't get off it quick enough, so it burnt all under my neck and along some part of my like around the under my chin. And then in the race, I think I was lying just in the points, like 12th, 13th or something like that, and they were starting to have some selective fault problems, and I went to go from 4th to 3rd in this fast left-hander, and it just went. I went to try and I got the clutch and try and go, and it just wouldn't do anything. It was just I couldn't get it to select either way, and then it just jumped down, it locked it, and it's the only crash I've never watched since. I went head to toes, over 100 mile an hour, and all the way to the barrier, which was probably 50, 60 meters. And my neck, I could feel it crunching. I thought, I'm going to break my neck here, right? And I landed in the biggest heap. I could barely move my neck. I was winded, sick in my helmet. But the first thing I did was I kind of crawled to all fours just to show everyone that I wasn't disabled or dead. And then and then just sort of like collapsed, and and it was it jammed, the gearbox had jammed, thrown me off, and it was so I was out of it. The next round was Silverstone. I'm on the front page of the cover. I can't ride because one of these discs is a millimetre against my spinal cord, and if I have a big whack, it could paralyse me instantly. And I could barely turn my head anyway. And they came to me and they said, "Oh, we're deducting your money for this round because you can't ride." And I was like, "What?" Because your gearbox clocked up. So I couldn't ride for the next 2 rounds. So they deducted me and it was 40, 60 grand or something to not be able to ride because of their mistake. And I got back, and I just could not live with Corsa. My bike was dreadful, and his was quicker through the speed traps. And I I said to my dad, I said, Joe, I can't go on anymore. I said, I hate this. I don't feel safe. I said, I look what Troy's doing. I just can't. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not as good as I think I can. I think I just want to quit. I can't do this anymore. And then courses. We went to a test, and all my engines blew. I had 4 engines, they all blew in the first day, and the only engines left for courses. So they put me one of courses engines in, right? Well, the fucking cunt. I'm sorry, excuse my language, because it was like a motorcycle. Right, and it was like, I took 2.8 seconds off the first time I rode it. It was the first time. Yeah, going from my last section. This thing would pull wheelies. It was a different beast. We got there for Magny-Cours the last round. I out-qualified Corsa for the first time that year. The engine was different. I put Bosworth up against the wall by the bloody neck. I'm like, how dare you? What the hell? And he's like, well, we didn't think we had enough engines. It was more important that Corsa had the uprated engines. I didn't even know there was uprated engines. They've been keeping on me these death trap engines, and there was a completely different engine that was like 60% better, more power, more torque, a nicer feel, with better balance, it was matte, but it was just unbelievable. When Eskil Suter was building them, he was like, "Oh, we've been sending them through to you for ages," and Bosworth had just been keeping them all for Corsa. So I was absolutely, oh God, I could have smashed his face in. So that was, but it was also exceptionally uplifting, because I suddenly realised I had the answers. This wasn't me. Listen, Corsa's a double world champion, multi-millionaire. He's a decent rider, but it turned out I hadn't become some chump. I was just riding a chump, right? And so that was great. I had to out-qualify him. The races actually went terrible. I got knocked off on turn 1 by one of the broccoli or someone it was. He hit my back wheel in turn 1 and knocked me down. And then in race 2, I think I was dicing for 5th or 6th, and I lost the front in the wet. But it was the first time I was racing again, and I could race again. So it kind of it gave me a little lift. They had fired me anyway. I wouldn't have stayed there for another moment. But then it came out the season, and no one wanted me. I couldn't get anything in BSB, couldn't get anything, and actually, I'd made some money, not enough to not do anything, but I'd been quite careful with where I put it, and most of it was in property, and I kind of said to Joe, well, I'd hated that year so much, and I felt I'd come close to really hurting myself. So I said, maybe I reckon I can do loads of other things. I'm not one of these guys that's all they can do is motorbikes. And I said, look, maybe I'm going to go and do something else. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Sell cars, sell motorbikes, high-end, sports cars, go and, buy houses, go and do, I just thought I can do other stuff. And, but also partly in me, I knew I wasn't finished with racing. So started the season with nothing. I was doing a bit of training. I was living out in the south of France at the time as well. I had a wicked house, and we had some great parties there. We had 29 naked people in our pool once. That was a good party. But it was it was really good cycling. I had Fabien Ferret just around the corner. He was one of my training partners, and we had a really, it was nice. So it was pretty chill there. But and then Stuart Easton got injured, and I got drafted to ride like a sort of privateer to Caddy at Snetterton, which I think I got 6th or 7th or 7th or 8th, first on my road. And then Steve Plater broke his leg on the Yamaha, so I'd missed the first 4 rounds. I'd missed the third of the championship, but I got on that bike, and that season was 2004 was the only season I never crashed once, right? And Rob Mack, I've actually got it in my garage. Rob Mack retired my bodywork, right? And he's like, James, and you know how tight Rob Mack is. He's like, I can't believe this, James, but cause it was so stone chipped and just, it's just a race bike variant that's been on all year, getting battered, but it was immaculate, but just stone chipped. He's like, I've got to give you this because I can't believe you've done most of the year and we haven't had one crash, right? So, but there was Plater, there was Gary Mason and me. When I got on the bike was set up really strange. So it took me a couple of meetings to get in the swing of it. But then I did, and then I was really quick on it. Quickest of all the Yamaha guys. I think I finished, I beat every other Yamaha in the championship, even though I missed the first 3 races. I won a race at Knockhill. I got podiums on it. And I was sort of top Yamaha. And so that was a really great season, and I really felt back on it and really, really positive. And guess back in the game, and after winning at Knockhill, guess who rings up? Colin Wright, and he says,
I was just going to say I watched that race at Knockhill the other day, wet race, and obviously it was the first race win for the Virgin Yamaha team, so like the whole garage was going crazy and stuff. Now I don't know whose decision this was, but having the 2 grid girls dressed as policewomen with tiny shorts on, I definitely, as I've been watching the races, I've seen a pattern that no matter who they interview on TV, they always went over to the Virgin Yamaha team. So I think that was someone in marketing or something must have put those tactics in. But
they were very strong disciplinarians, I can tell you that much.
I was laughing at the TV. The lady who was doing the TV interviews as well came over, and obviously it was like it had been raining. It was literally just before the race started, so you obviously everyone's quite nervous, and you were just putting your helmet on. And she came over and she said, "So James, what line are you going to take into to the first turn?" And you just looked at her as if to say like, "What a stupid," and you just went, "The fast one," and then just put your helmet on. And then you just went, I really enjoyed that race. Like you were proper dishing out some portions and obviously taking the win. So yeah, sorry to interrupt you. You were saying about Colin Wright.
Yeah, no. So we won that. I got an offer obviously to go again with them, and I got another offer from Suzuki, and then the Colin Wright came out and said, "Look, I got factory airwaves Ducatis. First year we're doing BSB, second year in World Superbikes. I've wanted you. I think you matured, and it had been a real kick in the box losing it the first time, but I was like, wow, brilliant. So it was a 2-year contract, so we signed it up, and I'm like, fucking fantastic. I am away, and I thought this. I've been plugging away, ups and downs, but this is going to be my year. Teammates with Leon Haslam, and so we get to do the first few tests. The first one's Valencia, not a track I particularly like. I was a bit off him. I think I was about a second half off him, but he loved that place, and I was getting used to that. That's Ducati. It was an unusual. It was very different from what I was racing. And then we got to Albacete, and I knew Albacete from before, and I was enjoying riding Albacete. And then I came in, my tyre was shagged, and I was just, in those early days of testing, it's quite good to go out on old tyres, you know what I mean? Because you're getting the bike moving at an easier limit, and it's just, I think it's good. It was one of the ways I quite used to learn to play with the limit on it when the tyre grip's gone down a bit. And but coming out of the second to last corner, I was going for a big slide, and it bit me really badly, and it flicked me. When it flicked me, it smashed both my little finger and the one next to it, and it broke both of them, but it smashed them both out the knuckle because it got caught in the brake lever and the jar, and it snapped them really badly. So got back to the hospital. I got a 2-year contract. We haven't even got to round one. So I speak to Colin and I said, look, the guy says, if I miss round one, he should be fine and I'm going to be fine. He says, if I go to round one and it gets a big, if it got a big wobble or a crash or something, you could be looking at several months out. Well, after us courting each other for, and actually he'd courted to me at Kawasaki back in the mid-90s. So this dance had been going on for 10 years, right? So I just didn't. I can't believe how naive I was now, but I just didn't think, after him wanting me and me wanting him, that there would be a problem with me missing one round when we've done a 2-year deal. They brought in Gregorio Lavia, and Lavia finished first and second on my bike, and leading in the championship. So I go up to Colin and go, that's an awkward one then, Colin, but and he says, no, you're out. And I was like, what? I said, what do you mean I'm out? I said, I got a bloody 2-year contract. Well, he goes, yeah, I'm sorry, James, you're out. So I was stunned. I kind of like, so here I was again suddenly with no ride. All the rides are taken. So I sued them and I won. So at least I got 2 years money out of them, which softened the blow somewhat, but not to go on to watch them, to do, those Airways bikes. You couldn't have been on a better bike. And I know that I would have been winning races, I'd have been part of parcel in that, if not dicing for that championship. So again, when you can look at it in two ways. So yeah, I could have, but again, maybe that was the year that something was going to go wrong and I'd have killed myself. Who knows? Do you know what I mean? There's always two ways of looking at it. It didn't come with what I did, and to watch Gregorio go on and win the championship on my bike with my numbers, was quite difficult. And I must admit, I was feeling a little bit more burnt out. It just kept kept digging myself up and brushing myself off and putting all the training in, and I just kept getting these kicks in the nuts, and I don't know, it wasn't really working for me so well. And then you remember little Craig Jones, he got, we all loved him, and what a great little kid he was, and I felt quite close to him. And then Brands, I'm starting to say to Jo, my wife, you know what, I'm just not sure I can keep digging in like this anymore. I said, I think I might want to do something else now. And also, I think I'm clever enough to find something else, and I want to be in charge of it. So this year that I'm sitting out, and Eurosport said, well, look, if you're sitting out for a bit, why don't you come and help us on the TV bit for a bit? So I was like, yeah, all right, okay. But I said, but I'm only going to do it for a bit because I'm going back racing. But so they came over, and then pretty soon after that, obviously I think I came back for a little ride with Kawasaki, finishing top Hawk Kawasaki, and then we it came to a point where I'd signed. It'd all been a bit bitsy. I'd signed for Hawke for the next year. Got my motorhome, got all my leathers and helmets pointed up. Everything's done and dusted. Sponsors on board. 2008, and 3 weeks before season starts, Stuart phones me up and he goes, James, I'm really not sure what's going on, but we've lost all our sponsors and we can't pay you, what we were going to pay you anymore. So unless you can bring money to us, it's not happening. And I was living abroad. I had like 3 or 4 houses. I had 2 kids by then. All cars and toys and all the bits and bobs. And I'm like, I'm years past riding for nothing. That's all right when you're 17, 18, but not when you're not when you're older. And I was like, well, I'm not doing that. So I took on this Eurosport deal, and actually that was again a real fortuitous move because the money disappeared out of that with a credit crunch, it disappeared out of it. You could, in the 90s, you could earn 250, 300 grand racing, super bikes in the UK, and for most people, it's not even near that now. And, we're talking 25 years later. And it's the money's, it's a real thing come out. And actually, and it did mean it wasn't all about money for me, but at the same time, you risking your neck, you got kids, you got mortgages. It also was important to me that I earned money. And also, you wouldn't expect the guy building the engines not to be paid money, or the team manager, or the guy driving the truck. So why would they expect the riders not to? And I still think that's a little bit of the sad bit of the sport that still hasn't quite reclaimed its glory. And I really, really hope those sort of money starts coming back. And it's bloody hell right now with all this, it's going to be another kick in the bollocks. But I think that hopefully, really, that's something even in the future I'd like to help work on to try and get finance back for riders, because riders should be coming to the ends of their careers with money and with houses paid off and a lifestyle, and not having to go out and instantly, crime away when you're doing such an amazing sport, putting so much into it, risking life and limb and doing so much. So, but anyway, I'm going off course, but the end of the point was 2008. So I signed for Eurosport, and I just thought it'd be a short-term thing, but that kept going, and obviously they were paying better money than most people were earning racing. And then I was doing the ITV with James Cracknell as well, so I was kind of getting doubly paid. And then, we became good friends, me and Cracknell. He's a top bloke, and he said, "Look, James, I'm going to get out of this, but I'll give you all the numbers. You approach them. This is what I'm earning." So I did, and then it meant that I kind of inherited the ITV thing, and I can't believe that, I'm like 11 years later now, and I'm still sort of doing those. And what's lovely is, it was really hard coming out of racing at first. I felt like I'd missed, like my legs were chopped off, or it was horrible. And also having to talk about a lot of people that some of these guys had never beaten me, and I'm having to gush about them on TV, and I'm thinking, I could kick your ass all day bloody long, right? And but it was kind of, so it was a learning process in that. But actually, we had a, Whittam I love, we had a really good team around us, and actually I learned it wasn't about, I never had a massive ego anyway, so I think it was quite easy for me to to adjust to that, and actually I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed commentary. I'm enthusiastic. I love this sport, so I like to try and make it exciting and make it sound exciting, and I like to bring in my own style to it. So, and actually look at that, it's kept me another 10 years riding. No one gets killed doing commentary, so I come home to my kids, and also, you're normally gone on a Friday, back on a Sunday. So, it's a really nice balance. And so I like it. And overall, do you know what? I look back on my career and I feel like firstly, I've raced some of the great names. I mean, I missed out coming back to MotoGP. Back in 2004, I did the last few MotoGPs against Rossi, Pedrosas, and all the boys, and again finished in the points. Got 12th in one of the Arab states that slips my mind for the time being. But so I've gone from Rainy Schwanz's, Durans, to your Baylisses, to your Colin Edwards, to your Foggies, to your Valentino Rossi's, and your Pedrosas, and your Haydons, and I've spanned this amazing time, gone from 2-stroke 500 weighing 120 kilograms to 200 mile an hour 4 strokes. MotoGP bikes, super bikes, and also I'm so lucky because that was all I ever raced. I wasn't like I was ever racing proddy bikes on treaded tyres, or I raced real bikes on slick tyres with slick teams, and at the end as well, I know I could have dropped down to different classes, but I was done by it then, and I kind of felt a little burned down from it, and I didn't ever want to lose that love and that passion. And even though it'll never feel like the right time, no one ever goes, oh, that's exactly the right time to quit. Because if you're doing really well, you think, why did I quit? If you're doing really badly, you think, I need to get back to doing well before I quit. But it kind of, and I never chose to kind of quit then. It just emerged that way. And I don't know. It's ended up being completely the right decision. I've got this great time with my family. I started a property business when I came out, and I've been working hard on that for the last 12 years. And that had, until this recent spate, been going incredibly well and growing from strength to strength, and really enjoying my life. I love being at the races for Eurosport and ITV. I love the guys I work with, and and I love motorbikes. I've got 14 motorbikes in the garage. I'm like, I love my cars. I've got great friends. I've got a good base, and I'm still having fast, and long may it last.
Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned about the Hawk thing happening in 2008, which was the last recession, and obviously this with this coronavirus, it's kind of like it'll put us back into recession. Do you think it'll have, or like how do you think it'll affect the BSB Championship now? And do you think the organisers will have to change maybe the way things are done to keep the show on the road?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a real nightmare for our sport, and certainly in 2008, a lot of the money just disappeared like that, and it was gone. And a lot of that's never returned. All these years later, rider salaries to the same extent they'd been before. So that is a concern. More concern for me is, if people are having to put people on furlough or laying off employees or closing down factories, the last thing they can be seen is sponsoring a motorcycle team, which for some could seem frivolous or over the top. So yeah, I think that there's going to be a knock-on effect. There's going to be people struggling to do it, not being able to do it. So we could probably lose some teams. I think BSB, are going to be able to, it will be able to go on. It's a very strong championship, and it's an unforeseeable, unknown. We've never had anything like this. So I think they are going to have to look at ways of supporting the people doing it, whether that would be, and I'm just literally thinking off the top of my head here, but whether they scrapped all entry fees or something, or tried to get the racing through, try to put a bit of prize money, so they take the gate money, but they try and allow it guys to get in cheaper to still keep the racing going. It needs to be looked at, but or whether we do a shorter championship and maybe try and get a better prize money that goes further down the field, prize money scheme. But the point is, there is no racing without the little man, and we were all the little man once, and we've all come through every which way, and they are the grassroots of racing, and they are just as important, if not more so, than anything the top riders do. So we do need to look after our sport. It's going to be a very difficult year, but where there's a will, there's a way, right? And actually, even if we cram them in, we got going in August. If you could do 3 in August and 3 in September, or 4, you might be able to do 1 a weekend for a few weekends or something. And I bet everyone's chomping at the bit. I can't imagine what it's like to be a rider right now. I would be spitting feathers. I'd have veins bulging out the side of my neck. I'd be just wanting to get going. So I'll be like, I can imagine it's a hard time for everyone. So I think they'll find a way. The nice thing about our championship is with Stuart and Jonathan, they can make the rules up as they go along. They can move very quickly. They're not encumbered by too many tie downs from other people and great big committees. So they can be very dynamic, and that sort of dynamicism is going to be very important to making this championship just be fleet on its toes and hopefully get the best out of it in what's going to be a difficult situation.
Yeah, spot on. Right, well, we'll just finish with a few quick fire questions. So first one, over the years, who's the best team boss that you've ever ridden for?
Wow, that's tough, only because I've had some exceptional ones. Ron Haslam was just brilliant. Loved him. Taught me so much. Right up there. Rob Mack, slightly different kettle of fish, but great fun. Really good guy. I really loved Roger Marshall as my team manager as well. All 3 of those guys were extra special, and I'm sure I'm missing out sort of some, but those 3 were extra special. Colin Wright, who I'd always wanted the most to ride for, and be after all the stuff he's done, my opinion remains unknown.
Awesome. Right. I want a 1-word answer, right? Or sorry, 2-word answer, sorry. Who's the best looking Eurosport presenter? Don't think about it, just answer.
Rachel.
There we go. Good man. All right, next. Caught me off guard on that.
If you while you're on lockdown, if you're going to get a box set of one BSB season to watch from start to finish, what year would you pick and why?
I think I'd probably pick 99. Obviously, I'm not joking you. I have not watched any of my races since 2000. Like those sort of races. So they've been on a VHS somewhere, hidden in a loft. But that season, I just remembered it. We had so much great competition. I had lots of fun racing it. I enjoyed the Suzuki. Lots of good races, lots of good people. So I think that I would do one that I relate to probably more than, it could be 99, 2000, 2001. Any of those 3 seasons would be good for me. I think I'd pick one that I was in.
Oh, fair enough. Aye. So, right, my final question before we let you go. Obviously, Chris will give you one more. But if you were trapped on a desert island, what 2 things would you choose to take with you? 2 things.
Your
wife and your kids isn't one. I'm talking survival.
Well, I would hope to take a stereo.
That's one. Awesome.
A stereo. I couldn't live without music. And then probably fishing kit would be quite handy, wouldn't it?
That's a good answer. That is a good one. There we are.
If you were to retrospectively manage yourself, so like from what you know now, if you were managing your career, is there anything in particular you would have changed? Any decisions you would have made differently?
Yeah, the biggest one would be, I mean, I don't quite over spilt milk, but that season when I should have just let JR finish ahead of me in that one race to go to World Superbikes, I just didn't think that in any way would jeopardise it, and I thought that I would be able to explain to Colin White the reasons why. So I would have changed that, because I think that I do really believe that would have probably launched me onto a very, very successful career in World Championship. Because I looked at the guys that I beat, like I say, it was be a Bayliss or a Hodgson or Walkers, or there was very few people I felt I couldn't run with. And even when I came across your Doones and your Rossies, and I wasn't watching people doing things that I couldn't do. But to be in World Championship, you need a good bike, and I never ever had a good bike in World Championship. Only ever British Championship. So those things I would have changed, I think.
Fair enough. And just before this interview, like earlier today, I had Captain Kawasaki, Craig Watson, on the phone, and I had it officially confirmed that the pronunciation of Kawasaki is Kawasaki and not Kawasaki. So Craig said ask him if he can pronounce Kawasaki correctly in future.
So what do you call that Japanese wine they drink?
Oh, sake, isn't it?
Sake, yeah.
Kawasaki.
Sake.
Well,
so the point is, you know what? I would have. I've always called it Kawasaki, obviously, and it's the Northerners that call it Kawasaki, right? So
God's country, young'un. God's country.
Yeah.
Kawasaki,
Right.
Nick a block of glory, Whitley Beer, Helter Skelter, the lot.
Right, okay. So Kawasaki is another thing. Now, when I first started doing it, so many people gave me a hard time about it that I made it my point not to change it, right? Because I could take a Kawasaki easily, right? But the fact is, so many people, you don't say that. So I was like, piss off. So from now on, it's almost a point that I just will always say Kawasaki. Kawasaki. Damn, got it wrong. I said how you wanted it. But I could change that, but I refuse to now, just because it bothers. Just because it bothers a few people. Is that mean? I don't know.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your time and really enjoyed hearing your crack. So yeah, thanks very much, and look forward to catching up in a race paddock sometime soon, hopefully.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I haven't bored you too much, and it's been really great to speak to you guys, and all the best for the season. And hopefully, I will be seeing you at a race.
Smashing. Okay, we'll catch up soon, and take care, James. Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
So I think that was the longest podcast that we've done, longest interview we've done so far. But I've over the last couple of weeks, I've been going back and watching the old races from the 90s and the beginning of the noughties, and it's great to kind of speak to somebody that was so involved, and it's going back on a era before I kind of started watching BSB, but I'm kind of putting all the pictures together and names that I've heard, all famous names from back in the day. It's kind of putting all the pieces together, and I enjoyed that.
He definitely wasn't afraid to speak his mind anyway, you know what I mean, about his feelings towards some of his old teams and team bosses and mechanics. And no, that was a proper insight, wasn't it? A very honest, proper insight into what actually used to go on. And let's be honest, it still goes on now. But
it's amazing what sort of coin was involved back in the day.
I wanted to hang myself, right? I'm like that going, oh man, everyone's rich and you and me are here. Yeah, and if it wasn't for our patrons and sponsors, mate, we'd be crawling around the streets. So thank God for you lot. But
it would be great if the sport could get back to those sort of times,
golden era,
with the big sponsorship deals and everything. But it's like we said, we sort of touched on it at the end of the interview. But I think the paddock's going to be a bit of a different place when the racing gets back.
Without a doubt.
Interesting to see. Obviously, like James mentioned, the fact that Stuart and Jonathan, like MSV, that own so many tracks and the championship, it means that they're massively in control. So hopefully they'll be able to come up with ways to incentivize people to come and race. But obviously at the moment they've got a bit of a thing going where all the paddock other than the superbikes pay very good money to enter the races. Then they get everyone to pay to come and watch. So it's there's a lot of money going into the sport, and maybe in order to keep the championship as strong as it is in these difficult times, if the sponsors are going to be dropping out of teams, and teams are going to be struggling for money, then the championship might have to come up with some ways of incentivizing people to things, because like there's so many people especially in the support classes, that say both parents work, and they put all the spare money together, and they can, with a bit of help from builders and plumbers
friends,
and stuff,
family and everything,
put money together and just get out. That's going to be really difficult after the economic climate that we're in. So it's hopefully, I tell you what, I did actually send Stuart a message to ask him to come on, because I would really like to put those questions to
Stuart
Higgs.
All right, yeah, that would be a hell of an interview. That.
So I'll keep badgering him, and hopefully we'll get him on at some point.
Yeah,
and,
but obviously we've got a lovely line of guests, but we're not going to spread that little secret out about. Yeah, we'll just keep on pushing forward and looking forward to getting them on. But
on that topic, if there's anyone listening that if you would really like to hear from somebody in specific from the sport, please drop us a message either through our website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whichever way it is, drop us a message. And also I'd just mention the fact that we've just launched our new Chasing the Race and mugs.
Bit of choke that'll fire,
Our new merchandise we've added to it with a red mug. Comes complete with a handle, and it holds both hot and cold water, whichever you choose. But
and you can hit your other half with it. It's fantastic. You know what I mean? Throw it at the kids, throw it at the dog. It is a multi-purpose tool.
So head over to all of our merchandise is through TT Cases, and if you go to their website, there's a Chasing the Racing link, and you can, if you would like to purchase a Chasing the Racing podcast mug, head over to there and drop them a message. That's awesome. All coming from the Isle of Man, so I'm not entirely sure what this. I know it has been severely locked down, so we've had a few things blocked from getting in and out of the country, but hopefully we'll get back to normal.
It'll switch all back on, man.
Bang on. What about yourself? Have you got much on this week?
I tell you what, speaking of what's been going on, you have noticed we haven't had a sponsor for this episode, Chrissy.
Difficult economic times.
Couldn't agree more. But if there's we've always got the door open, and if anyone would like to get on for the future podcast, don't be afraid to drop us a line. But obviously we can't thank. I think we should make bloody hell, Chrissy. It's our show. We can say what we want, but I'm speaking on behalf of both of us. We cannot thank our personal sponsors and everyone enough who have helped us, not only with this podcast, but on our personal racing level. And it is just phenomenal, and it really is great, because I have the 130 Club. Can't thank everyone enough. I can't thank, John Winters, Patterson's. Davies. I can't thank everyone enough. And I truly mean that. Everyone who's got me up to where I am, both on the track and off the track, I cannot thank you enough for everyone. I really can't.
Yeah, and that thanks obviously goes out as well to our patrons.
Chris is like, yeah, twice that from me, yeah.
Yeah, twice that. But really appreciate all the patrons, and we'll get another live stream sorted for the next few weeks. So we'll if you're interested in getting on that, it's kind of like a live stream with me and Dom. We'll maybe do a quiz or something
Definitely.
A bit interactive,
and some private giveaways,
and we'll get some of our patrons on to join us like we did a few weeks ago. So yeah, big thanks to everyone listening. And I will just mention last week's sponsor, the machine shop down in Hinckley. I hadn't when we did the sponsorship, I hadn't actually checked their website out, but I was so impressed.
That's professional.
Yeah, the machine shop, and I went on Machine Shop Hinckley. Just Google it, and I went on, and it's so cool.
That looks mint.
Do you know what? I'm jealous that I don't live closer, because I would be straight on it. And there's a YouTube video there that's it like shows you the inside of the shop. I know this isn't their sponsorship on this podcast, but I just feel like it's so valuable to anybody that lives around there that you should definitely check the website out and have a look. But are you working this week, or
back to work. So it's starting to come in a bit thicker and faster at the moment. So long may it last. Carithé.
Fabulous.
Awesome. What about yourself, quickly?
I am back to work this week for the first time in a while, obviously because of my shoulder. But I think we're working from home, so it'll be a case of trying to teach the kids from my bedroom, I think. And
steady on. That's how rumours start.
doing I don't know if we're doing online lessons or if we're just sending the work out or something, but we'll get that sorted and get the kids back doing the multiplications.
Awesome, mate. Right, well, thank you very much, Mr. Haydon, and thank you very much, Chrissy. It's been emotional.
Catch up soon, mate. Take care.
See you in a bit, son.
See you later.